What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Windy City Gridiron Radio with you, as always, your host, Robert Zaglinski. And I am pleased to be joined by the Ringers, Danny Kelly, to discuss the Seahawks today and the very, very saddening end of the Legion of Boom. I know Danny will act like it doesn't bother him too much, but we're going to get into that, and we're going to preview the Seahawks 2018 season. They're the next opponent in this podcast series. The Bears will play them in Monday Night Football Week 2. So we want to understand where they sit and why the Legion of Boom maybe had to end, and why the Russell Wilson magic is probably more of the focus now. Danny, thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And there's a big echo. I don't know if that matters.
I don't think I hear that, but if anything, that'll just give your voice more effect. That will make it
3D. Danny Kelly in 3D.
Danny Kelly in 3D. Yanni and Laurel, which we'll also discuss.
Oh my God, yeah, that was pissing me off yesterday. I'm definitely a hardcore Laurel guy. Although I wonder if that means that I have like terrible hearing and I've totally ruined all my ability to hear anything high pitched or not. But that's another story. Yeah, so I'm excited to talk about the Seahawks. Kind of.
Yeah, let's lead with that. So a lot of departures: Cliff Averill, Michael Bennett, Richard Sherman, which we'll talk about a little more after this. But what does this kind of exodus, I guess that's a nice loaded word there, what does this signal for the Seahawks? I mean, this was a team that was defined by their defense for most of the past era, was one of the most successful NFC teams in recent memory. It's kind of seems like they're on retooling or rebuilding, and maybe they don't really have a plan. I don't know.
I like all those euphemisms. I've gone with reset, the word reset, and it's kind of like opposed to being a complete rebuild, because I don't really see the Seahawks as a rebuilding team. I mean, when you have a quarterback, a franchise quarterback, and you have an all-pro free safety in Earl Thomas and a middle linebacker and Bobby Wagner, I mean, I don't think that necessarily signals that you're rebuilding completely. I think you've got, foundational pieces, but excuse me, but I think they, God, I do think that they are starting kind of a new era in their identity and who they are. And obviously they were defined by the Legion of Boom for years. And it's, I mean, obviously Earl Thomas is still there for now, at least, but it's kind of a whole new defense. And so, yeah, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. You could call it a rebuild, and that's fine. I've called it a reset because, like I said, they still have a few big pieces of their identity left. But we're seeing them try and get back to, I think it's like they're starting over in terms of their organizational life cycle a little bit, in the sense that they want to get back to running the ball really well. Last 2 years, they've kind of lost that ability and lost that identity. And, we saw that in the draft. Like, they took Rashad Penny in the first round. That was a big surprise. And, they've gone out on the free agent market and got a few guys that'll help with the run game and the tight end and offensive line, DJ Fluker and Ed Dixon, I think. And so, you're seeing them kind of like try and reset their identity, I think, is kind of the big deal.
Objectively, do you still consider them like a team that's in the thick of the NFC playoff race? It's a really loaded conference, Danny.
Yeah.
Do you still consider them a contender? I mean, especially in the division. I mean, the Rams are probably the best team in that division, considering everything they've done in this offseason, at least on paper.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are they a playoff contender?
I think that that's a vague sort of definition. I do think they can contend for the playoffs. Whereas, and let's make the distinction, because I think the last couple of years, I would have, fandom aside, I would have considered them one of the favorites as a Super Bowl team, coming out of the NFC. Because last year, I mean, it's easy to forget based on kind of how the season went, but went into the season thinking that the Seahawks had one of the best rosters in the NFL. Obviously, injuries and things happened, and it did not work out that way at all. But I mean, when they got Sheldon Richardson, it was like, wow, this team is stacked. And so compared to what they've been the last couple of years, I think it's definitely a major downgrade. That said, I do think they still have enough talent and I guess the pieces to be a potential contender. But I mean, I think if I had to put money on it right now, I would probably have them not making the playoffs next year just because, like you said, the NFC is super stacked. They're probably going to have to win the division to get into the playoffs. I mean, if you look at the NFC South and the NFC North, I mean, even the NFC East, all those teams have the potential to put two teams in the playoffs, potentially three. I mean, last year, I think the South put three teams in last year? And so
Saints, Panthers, and yeah. Three. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, it looks to me like they're going to have to beat out the Rams in the division. It's not going to be easy. I think they have the shot at it, but I would probably put money on them missing the playoffs next year. I just think that they're kind of, maybe more like a 9-win team, 8 or 9-win team than like a 10 or 11-win team.
Yeah, until they fix, which we'll get to later, until they fix those offensive line problems, I don't think Aaron Donald is too worried about those games. I don't, especially with Sue in the fold. I mentioned Sherman with the 49ers. So I guess the biggest narrative surrounding it was this was kind of his vengeance for being released. Right. So he immediately goes over to the Bay Area, goes to a team that's going to directly oppose the Seahawks twice a year. How are we supposed to gauge this? Are you worried about it? Are you a guy coming off an Achilles injury? Are you maybe even rooting for him in San Francisco in a way?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely rooting for him. I mean, obviously, when he's playing the Seahawks, I'm not like hoping he's picking Russell Wilson off or anything like that. But, I mean, he obviously endeared himself to Seahawks fans over the years. I mean, he had one of the most iconic plays in Seahawks history, really, when he tipped the ball to Malcolm Smith to send the Seahawks to the Super Bowl in 2013. And so, I mean, he was kind of the face of the team for a couple of years. I mean, obviously there was Marshawn Lynch and Russell Wilson and Cam Chancellor and other guys, were big, but I mean, Richard Sherman was just despised by everybody and Seahawks fans loved him for it. And so, I'm definitely rooting for him going forward. I hope that he comes back and that his Achilles doesn't affect his game too much. He's never been like a guy that's super dependent on quick twitch speed. So he could come back and still be good. But I am a little bit worried about it just because, he's getting older in the first place and coming back from an injury like that is never going to be easy. And so you just worry a little bit that I'll have some, follow-up issues to it. But I'm definitely rooting for him. I would say most Seahawks fans probably, want him to succeed and want him to have a good rest of his career. Again, probably not against the Seahawks, but I think everybody still likes him a lot.
Is this like the Brett Favre of corners going to Minnesota in a way?
Yeah, well, the Seahawks 49ers rivalry is kind of funny because for a couple of years, like during the Jim Harbaugh era, it was incredibly heated and it was a really, really good rivalry. And then over the last few years, it's really died off and hasn't been that fierce or angry of a rivalry. So I don't think it doesn't have like the same, like you betrayed us type of thing like that. I don't know. I never got that sense that it was like that big of a deal. I think if it was like in the heyday of the Seahawks 49ers rivalry a couple of years ago, I think it would have been a little bit different, but 49ers have been pretty bad the last couple of years and just hasn't had the same strength. So it doesn't really feel like a backstab or anything like that.
I was really hoping that you'd say the opposite, like you'd go all in on the storyline and then like you'd push it. It's fine. We do a little clickbait on the podcast. It's totally cool.
I could bring some more hot takes if you want. I can turn up the heat a little.
Okay, yeah. What's the hot take on your mind? It doesn't necessarily have to do with the Seahawks, but if it has to do with the Seahawks, let's hear a hot take.
I wish I would have been more prepared for some takes. Okay. Let's see here. Jimmy G is trash and he's ugly. I don't know.
Jimmy Garoppolo?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, trash maybe. Ugly no. Come on. He's objective.
Now I know you're lying. Okay.
He's objectively a beautiful man. Come on.
Yeah, I know.
Moving on is 2018, and I don't want to put too much stock into one year and hyperbolize too much, but Is it kind of a hot seat year if they can't get back to the playoffs? The first 2017 was the first time this organization missed the playoffs since 2009.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is it kind of being framed that way? Do they have to have a big rebound? Is something like 5-11, 6-10, 7-9 seen as a huge failure?
I think the Seahawks went to the playoffs in 20. They didn't go to the playoffs in 2011 or 2010 either, I don't think. But they did make the playoffs like 4 or 5 years in a row after Carroll kind of took control and built up the roster. I think that
2011. Yeah, you're correct.
Yeah, so I don't think if they miss the playoffs, Carroll's on the hot seat. What I do think is that potentially he could think about retiring. Which is, I think, more what people are afraid of rather than, hey, maybe anything's possible. I don't think the Seahawks would fire him. I don't think Paul Allen's going to fire him. But I think there is the fear that, like, if he loses his enthusiasm, if the Seahawks really go in the other direction next year and struggle and have a lot of, drama and all that, there's kind of the fear that Carroll could retire. So, or, not retire necessarily, but leave and go do something else, like go back to USC or whatever. But
just walk away. Just walk away.
Yeah, and so I think that's kind of the fear. Like, you kind of want there to be a recaptured excitement and energy around the team. I think the last 2 seasons have been pretty, for the most part, frustrating for Seahawk fans. Obviously, it's good to have a winning team, and people should not lose sight of that. They did win 9 games, but it's been frustrating a couple of years in terms of just injuries and team like infighting and kind of just constant drama around the players and the coaches and all that. So, but I do think Carroll, as long as there's like some sort of feel of going in the right direction, I think he's kind of in it for a few more years based on just kind of like they changed all their coaching staff. They're kind of revamping and going back to what, I think what he wanted him to be. There's talk of him sort of resetting the culture, and getting rid of some of his bigger personality veterans like Michael Bennett and Richard Sherman, trying to get sort of, I guess, the message that he had early with the team kind of ingrained back into the psyche of the team or whatever. So feels like he's ready for like a refreshment of kind of like what he's doing. And so I feel like that's probably in his mind, a couple years like process. And so, long story short is I don't think he's on the hot seat. I don't think he's on the hot seat necessarily, but there is some fear that he'll just leave if things don't go well this year.
Let me be a devil's advocate and then pull out the hot take. So you kind of just said it, that seems like he's in it for a couple more years, that he's trying to do a reset. Well, would it be more beneficial for some coaches, they kind of have a shelf life. It's like sometimes 6 or 7 years, 5 or 6 years, and then maybe veterans start tuning them out. Maybe the organization could just use a breath of fresh air.
Right.
Would that be the case with Carroll? I mean, are we going towards that territory? Again, devil's advocate. She is a hot take.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to see. I want to see what you think.
I don't think it's necessarily even that big of a devil's advocate argument, too, because I think there is sort of, at least in the people that I talk to, there's sort of the feel. It's funny because honestly, in 2013, 2014, and then into sections of 2015, like saying that Carroll is maybe not the right man for the job would have been sacrilege. I mean, he turned around the Seahawks. It was amazing what he did. People 100% bought into everything he was selling. And I mean, I did too. Like, I loved his whole philosophy, his whole program, like the always compete, win forever. I was like all into all that, and I think now there's a lot of people that are probably questioning, like, okay, maybe, that definitely worked, but maybe it's not necessarily the best way of going about it. Like, there's a lot of, and this is kind of the big talking point right now, is there's tons and tons of research on how much more efficient passing is than running. And Seattle seems to be very, very much dedicated to running and going back to sort of like the old school of football where, all these stats and efficiency measures and analytics kind of tell you like that's not the best way to win. And so there's definitely sort of, I think, some question whether it was a flash in the pan kind of success thing that happened, with the Seahawks in 2013, 2014, or, if maybe, they definitely, if they need some new ideas and they need to take it in a new direction. So there's definitely some questions, I think. And that would have been, like I said, that would have been really rare and sacrilege probably a couple of years ago, but it's gotten to the point now where people are like, okay, maybe something better, someone else would do better at this point.
It sounds like it's the kind of thing where you're winning and everyone will just blindly follow you because everything's working out, and you can literally get away with whatever you want. And now that it's kind of like, I mean, this is an obvious point, but now that cracks are showing in the armor,
right,
they do something like invest in Rashad Penny in the first round and go away from analytical success with passing and running. It's like, okay, maybe you don't know what you're talking about.
right.
I mean, but if they were 13-3, if they were 13-3, 14-2, and still the class of the conference, like, no one cares.
Yeah, I mean, it's human nature, obviously,
Yeah.
and there's just so many variables that go into building a winning team in the NFL that it's like impossible to figure out, whether it's based on Carroll's philosophy, his ability to build a team, his ability to instill, confidence and competition, blah, blah, blah. Or, hey, maybe they just got really fucking lucky when they chose, they had like the most amazing draft class in 2013 or 2012. I'm trying to remember the Russell Wilson draft class or whatever. And when they got Wilson, they got Bobby Wagner. And then obviously they picked Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor in the mid rounds. I mean, they like hit on a crazy amount of all pro talent. They got Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett for basically peanuts and free agency. They had all these major hits. And then since then, their drafts have been really underwhelming. Their free agency moves have been terrible. Their trades have been pretty terrible. I mean, you see like the Percy Harvin thing just went terribly awry. The Jimmy Graham thing never worked like they thought it would. There's all these different, personnel moves over the last few years and draft moves over the last few years that you're just like, what are they doing? And so for a while there, it was like, man, they just know what they're doing. They've got it figured out. And now it's like, okay, maybe they just got lucky. Like all the right variables kind of just happened at the same time. And it's really hard to kind of assign credit on, you know what I mean? It's like hard to figure out like why they were the number one team in DVOA like 4 years in a row. And so like when that happens, you're like, okay, these guys know exactly what they're doing. They've figured it out. But then, it's slowly chipped away at it, and the confidence you have in them is slowly chipped away. And like I said, you're kind of just like, okay, well, maybe they just got lucky.
These sound like such winning team problems, like such like as a guy from Chicago, like I honestly cannot relate any less.
Well, and that's the thing is like when as a fan base, when you have a lot of success, you begin to expect that. And I mean, it's really hard to deal with it's not even mediocrity, like less than excellence. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just like, what are they doing? When, like I said, they won 9 games last year, like most teams would be pretty happy about that. And it felt like a complete and total failure for the Seahawks last year. And so it's definitely weird. I'm definitely aware of the fact that like these are, like you said, like first world problems, but it's kind of the nature of fandom, I think.
Well, yeah, it's a natural thing. It's totally okay. It's just I'm a little envious, but it's totally okay. So the focus of the franchise is it's been Russell Wilson, but now it's almost as much as they're going to try to maybe support him more with a solid running game more than they have in the past few years. It's still more or less going to be his show. He's still going to be the guy that produces 60 to 70% of the team's offensive yards, more than likely, at intermittent points. But for whatever reason, Danny, they're still, at least it seems like it, they're still neglecting the offensive line. And I think you'll agree with this. The Seahawks under Carroll not addressing the offensive line was kind of wasted the era. To me anyway.
Yeah.
Why doesn't this organization commit more up front? Like why it's such a simple concept. Like why not just focus more on development and focus more on actually getting quality draft picks, free agency additions, or whatever.
Well, and that's a big like argument or point of contention among fans right now is because they actually have invested a lot in the offensive line. they just haven't gotten any results out of it. So they obviously, they took Jermaine Ifedi in the first round. They took Ethan Posich in the second round. Justin Britt's a second rounder. They used a second round pick to get Dwayne Brown. They used a first round pick to get Russell Okung, and he didn't stick around. But I mean, you go down the line, they've actually put a lot of draft capital into the offensive line. They haven't put as much money into it, which, by the way, you can explain it away because I mean they've had an incredible payroll on their defense over the last few years. I mean they had to decide, are we going to try and bring in outside free agents for the offensive line or pay our superstar defenders? It's kind of like they didn't have, it wasn't necessarily an either or it was kind of an either or thing. They couldn't necessarily build an amazing offensive line while at the same time paying Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Bobby Wagner, Cam Chancellor, Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, all these guys. At one point, they had like 7 or 8 dudes just making top dollar at their position. It was just crazy. And so, it was just kind of one of those things where they decided to pay the defense, and they thought, and they had faith in Tom Cable to basically take a bunch of no-name offensive linemen, some guys who hadn't even played offensive line, and develop them into offensive linemen. It just did not work. And so Tom Cable's gone. And yeah, I mean, it does feel like a waste, and it still feels like a waste because they didn't really do a whole lot this offseason either to kind of address the situation. And so I just saw Ben Baldwin from The Athletic posted article about it yesterday or today, and it was like talking about how over the last 4 years or 5 years, no one in the NFL has faced more pressures under 2 seconds than Russell Wilson. It's like guys are just missing blocks immediately. And if you watch the tape, I mean, that's what you see. And so, I don't know. It's just one of those things where maybe this kind of signals a change in the way the Seahawks are going to start like putting their available money in their roster. Like maybe they'll invest more on the offense now and kind of try and build up the defense with draft picks. And so, I think my just personal opinion is now that they're building around Russell Wilson's kind of the center of their focus now. It does make more sense to put in more money and more, just like hired. Like I would be fine. I would have been fine if they used another first rounder on an offensive lineman, frankly, just because I think when the Seahawks are at their best, it's when Russell Wilson has a few seconds to process, because he's really, really good from a clean pocket. Like he's amazing from a clean pocket. And really, to me, that's their best chance of winning, is giving Russell Wilson a few seconds to throw the football, which they haven't really had much of over the last few years.
So it sounds like you're pinning it on more of a developmental thing than invest, or than actually how they invest. But from that perspective, it's weird to me then that they would take someone like Penny, because it's almost like, and again, this is me spitballing, it's almost like they're going to try to invest more in the run game to kind of maybe use that as something to prop up their offense until they can rebuild their offensive line. And that's just me putting a theory out, like that they're going to use Penny, they're going to give him 20, 25 carries while they can build up their offensive line. Then by the time like Wilson's, what is he now, 28, 29?
Something like that, yeah.
So by the time he's 30 or 31, then they have an actual offensive line, and then they can use Penny less. Is that, does that hold credence?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And you look back in the Seahawks run games under Marshawn Lynch, and it wasn't like their offensive line blocking was amazing back then. It was like Lynch was breaking a shitload of tackles all the time. And I think they talked about Penny when they took him, that, he's one of the best guys after contact. He was very effective tackle breaker and very elusive. And so I think they definitely see him as not Marshawn Lynch, obviously, because you can't really compare anyone to Marshawn Lynch, but guy who can do more with less on the offensive line. And I think Carroll, he's always espoused, since he came to Seattle, even before they took Russell Wilson, he's always talked about how, Bill Walsh taught him that the best way to build the longest and most consistent way to make a winner is to take as much pressure off of the quarterback as possible, because obviously the quarterback is the biggest variable in football. And so he's always like wanted to go and build a team that can still win if your quarterback gets hurt. Like that's kind of the thing. Like if it's a windy, rainy day, he wants a team that can win in any situation. Essentially, he's trying to take away variables, right? And so I think that's why he believes in the run game, because it's something that the team can depend on, whether it's rainy, windy, whether Russell Wilson gets hurt, blah, blah, blah. Like he wants a team that can win despite all those things. And so, I think that's why he believes so much in the run game. And despite what, advanced metrics would say, like he's never going to change that thought. And so, I mean, I've said over this offseason, like this offseason is Pete Carroll taking back the wheel, doing like he basically is like, Sinatra is like, I'm going to do it my way. This is my way or the highway. I'm going to go down.
What a reference.
I'm going to go down. Like if I'm going to go down, at least I'm going to do it my way. Like I read his book and he was really like the thing that you take away from his time in New England when he got fired out of New England. And then that's why he went to college. What you can take away from that to me was that he just felt like he had his hands tied and like by front office and everything. And so he has full control of the Seahawks. He wants to do it his way. He has a very, very strong philosophy and, very well articulated. Like he wrote a book literally. And so, I mean, I think he just wants to, he's not going to be swayed. He wants to do it his way.
I really like the shameless musical plug in there. That was nice and seamless.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to ruin that by reading off the 2018 the Seahawks free agency editions. All right, so I mean, you mentioned, and this is in no particular order, but you mentioned something. So Ed Dixon. A perennial project, Barkevious Mingo, who's still looking to find his potential at 27 after years in the league. Jerron Brown, Shamar Stevens, Tom Johnson, Sebastian Janikowski, Byron Maxwell. Seabass. Byron Maxwell is back again. DJ Fluker, Marcus Smith, Mike Davis, Dante Johnson, and then Austin Davis. Danny, what are we thinking? who's? I mean, that's not exactly a tip-top free agent class necessarily. No. It doesn't have to be, but who's gonna kind of make the most impact of these guys? Who's gonna play the biggest part for Seattle in 2018, if any? To be fair, if any.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, like literally, the Seahawks free agent class was adding role players, and that's fine. And that's, I mean. Free agency is a minefield because
some of those are generous, though. To say role player, some of that is generous.
Yeah. So, okay. So Barkevious Mingo, he's going to play their Sam linebacker spot. It's never been a super important part of their offense or defense, sorry, because a lot of times they're playing nickel anyway. And they only have 2 linebackers on the field, but he's the kind of guy who's really athletic and they can maybe try and have him rush a little bit. Like he's a role player. They added Deion Jordan, Marcus Smith, 2 guys that, based on efficiency stats, did pretty well rushing the passer. Now they're going to be expecting those guys to do, put up big volume over longer, more snaps. And so that's kind of a huge question mark. I think Deion Jordan could be good. I think when he played last year, he really flashed. Like he looked pretty good. So he could surprise some people, but there's no track record. There's no real track record for it. So it's a huge question mark. I don't know Tom Johnson's game really well. I haven't watched a ton of tape, but I've talked to a bunch of guys from Minnesota and they love him. And I think, he's going to be a guy, I think that could be he could outplay kind of the impression that he made when he was signed. I think people are going to end up liking him a lot more than kind of like, just the name recognition isn't great. Tom Johnson's like, that's the most general vague name ever in the first place. So I think it's like, who is this guy?
You'll find that guy listed a bunch in the yellow pages if people still see the yellow pages, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think he's the kind of guy who could kind of outplay his reputation, or not reputation, but like the impression that people got from him. So, those are all role players. And Byron Maxwell, I like Byron Maxwell actually. Like I was excited when the Seahawks re-signed him. I think he's been terrible everywhere else he's gone, but he's really good. Or not really good. I don't want to oversell it. He's solid in the Seahawks system. There's a reason, the Eagles signed him to this enormous contract after he played for the Seahawks, because he was really good in the Seahawks scheme. And obviously that didn't work out for the Eagles. It didn't work out when he was with the Dolphins, but in Pete Carroll's scheme with what the unique kind of specific things they ask of him, I think he's really solid. So he'll probably, to me, he'll be their starter and he'll be solid. This is maybe being a little bit too rose-colored lens or whatever, optimistic.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Stand on your soapbox.
No, I'm saying what I'm saying previously might be a little too optimistic, but ultimately, like, I liked those role player, additions. Now, I will say on the other side, I don't think the Seahawks have very much talent outside of Baldwin and Lockett in the receiver core. I'm worried about kind of what they're going to have, downfield for Russell Wilson. They lose Jimmy Graham, so they don't have like a guy who can just post up in the red zone. Their offense was, outside of Jimmy Graham, was atrocious in the red zone last year.
They lost Luke Wilson too, so I'm going to sound really ignorant right now, but who is the starting tight end? Just hold on.
Oh, that's not ignorant. That's a good question. I'm assuming it's Ed Dixon.
I think it's Ed Dixon.
They got him, and kind of the reputation is he's a good pass blocking tight end, and it's kind of one of those things like it'll help the offensive line because he's a good pass blocker. And so I guess you can kind of count him like offensive line 6 kind of guy. Nick Vanette, they keep talking him up. We don't really know much about him. They think he's kind of like a two-way guy. He can block, or this is what we're told. He can block and then also go downfield and catch the ball, but we really don't know much about him. Will Dissly is a rookie who I think will probably play quite a bit because he's supposed to be a really good run blocker. He's a former defensive lineman who switched to tight end at UW and kind of just showed natural ability to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's probably, you'll have someone that officially starts probably, but I don't think there's going to be any one like guy they lean on hard. I think it's going to be kind of like each guy has a different role to play.
Before we talk draft, what was the deal with not bringing Sheldon Richardson back? And that's me just in general.
Again, it's kind of just a money allocation type thing. I think, I don't know what he got, like $8 million for a 1-year deal. He was probably looking for a lot of money on a longer term deal. And I just don't think the Seahawks wanted to dedicate, $8 to $10 million in cap hit per year to an interior rusher who got 1 sack last year. Obviously, he was pretty efficient as an interior rusher. I think he's top 10 interior rusher just based on Pro Football Focus's like pressure rate type stats. But yeah, I think he only had 1 sack. And so it's like, you got to kind of just decide, you can only have so many $10 million guys on your defense, right? And I think they just ultimately decided that he wasn't a high enough impact player to kind of make someone that they're building around. And obviously it didn't work out. They wanted the way that they wanted. I think they traded for him because Malik McDowell got hurt. They were depending on Malik McDowell to kind of come in and bring that pressure from the inside. They traded for Richardson because they thought they could win a Super Bowl.
Right.
And obviously all the injuries kind of affected that ability, and they a couple bad bounces here and there, and they lost games. They missed a couple kicks that were really important and lost games because of that. And so I think they really were just going for it. They saw him as a guy who could help them win a Super Bowl that year. That was like what they needed to win the Super Bowl. It was like one piece of the pie, but and it just didn't work out.
Wow, Danny, it sounds like you're still blindly following Pete Carroll's decisions, to be honest. Wow. Like just defending everything they do. Can you be a little objective? Gee. Pop quiz. So you mentioned 2012 being a fantastic draft for the Seahawks. Bobby Wagner, Russell Wilson. Well, since then, who do you consider to be the best draft pick the Seahawks have had? And we can't really count 2018, obviously, because no one's played there. But 2017, 2016, 2015, 2014, and 2013.
Oh, man.
We have enough there. Who is the best Seahawks draft pick in the last 5 years?
I'm just pulling it up. Hold on. So we got, let's see here. My instinct is probably Tyler Lockett, which is, come on. Hold on. I'm trying to pull it up.
I would have said someone else, but yeah.
That Frank Clark?
Yeah, definitely
Frank Clark, actually.
22 sacks. That's easy. That should be easy.
So I'm just looking at it. Let's see here. I mean, I think Shaquille Griffin is going to end up being a really good player. So, I mean, he's already shown a lot of promise in 1 year, and I think he's going to be just getting better. And so I think you could almost say Shaq Griffin. Just going down the list, I mean.
Wait, Shaquille Griffin? When you say
Shaquille Griffin.
Shaquille. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, Shaquille Griffin, who played corner for him last year. I mean, we could, in a couple of years, Shaquem Griffin might look like an awesome pick.
Right.
I'm just going off of kind of what's happened. I would say, yeah, I mean, it's between Frank Clark, Tyler Lockett, and Shaq Griffin. So, Shaquille Griffin. So, yeah, and
Not
that's
great.
And that kind of, that tells you how their drafts have been. I mean, Paul Richardson was a solid player. Justin Pritt, starter. That's fine. Their 2013 draft was atrocious. Luke Wilson was the final holdover for that class, and he just left. Obviously,
But Ware became a good player with
they cut him though. And then also, I mean, like if you're looking at players that ended up being really good pros, I mean, like Alex Collins might end up looking like one of their better picks, and they cut him right, after like
and then they wouldn't have had to draft Rashad Penny.
Yeah.
Theoretically, I know that's not how it works, but
yeah, exactly. So, not only can you question, the quality of their drafts, but they ended up making a couple of weird decisions on who to cut, and kind of affected like what they had to do this year. And so, I mean, their drafts have just been really underwhelming. It's really affected their ability to have depth, at key spots on their roster. They're if like the best case scenario is you're getting like one solid starter out of a draft, like that might not be enough.
Yeah, you want like 2 or 3. I think that's what we normally settle on. If you can get 2 or 3 starters, that's the ideal.
Especially compared to like, I mean, like again, I said the 2012 and 2013 drafts, or 2011 and 2012 drafts. I mean, they got all pros out of those drafts, like several all pros, and that's a big difference. So yeah, it doesn't show up right away, but that really chips away at your ability to have like a contender.
So with this recent Browns and Jets and even Bears like draft history, I don't know how much stock we can put into 2018, but obviously we won't be able to judge them until they get on the field, Danny.
Right.
But who do you kind of see being the guys that end up panning out to be the best players, end up making the most impact in 2018? We've talked about Penny a lot, but you can go with anyone else. You can go with a number of guys. I mean, I personally appreciate taking an All-American punter in the 5th round, Michael Dixon. That's a investment in field position right there. That's something you have to appreciate.
That's such a Pete Carroll pick too. I mean, like I said before, it's like he has always preached, special teams are just as important as defense and offense. But
yeah,
it's one of those things where they really want to play the field position game. And I think it was funny because most Seahawks fans, when they traded up, because they traded up to get him, most people were like, oh, who's it going to be? It's going to be really exciting. And then it was a punter, and everyone just like laughing. But then, once you look into, because I did zero, research on punters in the draft. And then once you start seeing some of the scouting reports on him, you're like, oh, okay, this is kind of fun. I'm actually really excited about this because, just what you hear, he has an amazing ability to kind of just put the ball right in the corner, inside the 5-10 yard line or whatever.
That is the most football nerd thing possible. And I'm with you there to get excited about a punter. But anyway, continue. Sorry.
So, but I mean, when I look at this draft, it's funny because it sort of mirrors their free agency class too, in the sense that it looks like a bunch of role players, and that's maybe good. I mean, if they can get multiple starters, like we just talked about out of this draft, I think that's a pretty solid draft. I think Penny's going to be a solid starter. I think Will Dissly, for what the Seahawks want to do, is going to be a solid player because he'll be able to run block, and that's what they want to do. I think Shaquem Griffin is probably going to develop into either a strong side, a weak side linebacker, kind of run and chase guy, or potentially play him kind of like a safety hybrid type player. And I'm really excited about what he can do. And then Trey Flowers, who was a safety at Oklahoma State, is now kind of transitioning to cornerback. I think there's some potential there. Over the years, the Seahawks have drafted highly athletic, longer guys in the 5th round. Yeah. Most of them haven't panned out, but obviously Richard Sherman did, and to a lesser extent, Deshaun Shedd did. He was a undrafted free agent, but he developed into like a starting caliber player for them for a little while before he tore his ACL. So they're really hit and miss on kind of their later round project corners, but I think there's some excitement to be had because Trey Flowers is huge. He's like 6'3" with really long arms, really, really athletic guy. And so there's some excitement there. Yeah. So, I mean, overall, it's like one of those classes where you can kind of pick out guys that'll contribute. I'm not like overly excited about any of them, to be honest, but
Right.
I think there's guys in there that can contribute early, and we'll see. I think Rasheem Green is kind of the X factor, though. Like, you have to right now, like what he is like, and he's a perfect example of what the draft ultimately is like you're taking a guy for what he can become, not what he's done. And I think they see he's like 20 years old. They see him as a really raw piece of clay that they can develop into that Michael Bennett role. And so we'll see how it works out. I mean, he had some pretty solid efficiency numbers as a pass rusher. But again, he's anything but a complete product at this point. So I think the Rasheem Green will be a guy I kind of watch over, not this year, but like in 2 or 3 years.
How did that Shaquem Griffin being reunited with Shaquille Griffin thing get you? You a little emotional?
That was awesome. It was like a really, really fun part of day 3.
Yeah.
I watched literally zero of the other sort of draft day, whatever, like the stuff that was on the NFL Network, like these
Lucky guy.
Yeah, I watched zero of that. I had it on my TV, but I had it muted. But the things that I did turn up the volume and kind of sit back and watch were when they were interviewing Shaquem Griffin. I just think that was really cool. He's obviously a really inspiring story, and I think he's a really good football player too. And so it's just kind of the bonus too that he's going to be now playing with his twin brother on the Seahawks defense. I think that was definitely the feel good moment of day 3. It was really fun.
Maybe a feel good moment of the draft, and I don't know hyperbole. So I was. Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to take him. I think most teams and writers and fans would have appreciated them on his roster. So, but him getting back with his brother, I mean, you can't beat that, man.
Oh yeah, and like I said it before, his brother looks kind of like a budding star for the Seahawks too. So there's sort of a non-zero chance that the Seahawks could have 2 potential stars.
In
the Griffin brothers, and so that's super exciting.
Let's finally get to the meat of this, or well, not the meat of this, but so the Bears and Seahawks, they're going to play Monday Night Football, Week 2, Soldier Field, first regular season meeting in Chicago since Russell Wilson drove dagger into the end of the Brian Urlacher era.
Yeah, I try not to bring that up with Chicago fans, but yeah.
Yeah, I know you do though. And I resent you for it. But we'll soldier on. But yeah,
good pun.
Yeah. Oh wait, I just realized. Oh wow. Okay. Anyway, since the last time these two teams met overall, in 2015, where the Bears punted 10 times and didn't cross midfield with Jimmy Clausen at quarterback.
Oh yeah.
You're just enjoying this anyway.
I forgot about that.
Anyway, there's been a bit of a shift. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Bears are a better team than 3 years ago, or at least better coached. Matt Nagy is kind of maybe is the Pete Carroll of Chicago now, where everyone's going to blindly follow him until something goes wrong, which is fair. That's what happens with a new coach. That's what happens with a young coach. What concerns you, Danny, about what the Bears are bringing to the table now? And the pivotal early season matchup, going to go full narrative.
I mean, well, number one, like I've been telling Mays, like Robert Mays' colleague is a big Bears fan, and he's always really reticent to like hype up the Bears too much because he knows better over the years, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
we've been hurt a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So he's a little snake bitten about all that. But I mean, I feel like I've sort of taken over his role as like the Bears hype man because I'm super excited about what they've done and the talent base they've built. I've always been a Vic Fangio fan, so it's kind of been cool to see how the defense has come together too. Obviously, they've got some talented guys in the secondary. I think that they've built a pretty solid interior defensive line. Obviously, now they've got 2 really good run and chase linebackers in Roquan Smith and Danny Trevathan. And The one thing that concerns me about the Bears defense is their pass rush, which coincides with the Seahawks' worst, fault or whatever. So
Yeah.
that kind of, I think that initial sort of look sort of tips the scales towards Seattle a little bit, since the Bears can't necessarily take advantage or won't have as good of a chance to take advantage of the Seahawks' biggest weakness as a lot of teams will. But it'll be interesting to see what Seahawks defense does against the Bears offense. We don't really know anything about how the Bears offense is going to look. And I frankly am kind of happy that it's early in the season, before Trubisky kind of hits his stride, if it's going to happen next year.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I think it's going to be a process. It's probably not going to happen overnight that this team all of a sudden is like a really, well-oiled machine on offense. But I love the idea of kind of coming in with that hybrid West Coast scheme where you're doing a lot of motion before the snap and you kind of spread teams out, and just basically what the Chiefs did last year. I think that was really fun offense, and I'm excited. I think that Trubisky, from a skill set point of view, is tailor-made for that. And so they've done a good job of getting weapons around him. They've done a good job of building a pretty solid offensive line. Now it's time to execute it, and we'll see how that works. I do think the Seahawks defense has a huge amount of question marks on it. So we go into this year kind of having no freaking clue what either the Bears offense or the Seahawks defense is going to look like. So it should be a fun one. I think the Bears are probably one of my top few teams that I'm really interested and excited to watch next year. And so that's definitely one to circle. I didn't even actually realize they had a Monday night game. That's pretty fun.
You mentioned the pass rush, and that's something interesting to me because I've railed obviously plenty against it for the Bears not really investing in the edge rush.
Yeah.
So would you say like so the interior of Seattle's offensive line is okay? Because that's kind of where I would consider the Bears pass rush to actually be strong. I mean, Akeem Hicks is an all-pro level player. I think fairly. I mean, he didn't get that distinction, but he is like skill-wise, and you have Eddie Goldman there. So more of Seattle's concern is the tackles, I'm guessing.
No, I mean, their whole offensive line is pretty bad. Okay. I think obviously, now I'm blanking on their left tackle. Dwayne Brown.
Dwayne Brown.
He's good. I think he's going to be really good. But I have very little faith in kind of the rest of the offensive line until I see them come together and sort of actually look like an offensive line. But my point is more just like you don't go into the game with a ton of trepidation like you would against, the Chargers or
Eagles,
the Rams or the Eagles. Yeah, I mean, it's just those types of teams I think can just kind of turn it into a bandsaw for what the Seahawks are trying to do. Like that, those kind of teams can completely ruin the Seahawks game plan. And so a team without an edge rush like the Bears is slightly less intimidating. But it doesn't mean that they can't beat the Seahawks. It just means, they're just slightly less intimidating from that point of view.
One last point about this. One player that most scares you on the entire Bears roster that like you're confident will tear Seattle apart or could tear Seattle apart in that matchup. Figure in everything. Yeah. So
that's a good question.
I'll give you some time.
I mean, I think probably Allen Robinson. And again, that's kind of like, I don't know.
I don't think that's an obvious answer. I mean, we don't know what he's going to be. I don't think that's necessarily that obvious of an answer.
And the other answer I was actually going to come, which kind of contradicts what I just said, though, is like I like Hicks a lot. I think he's a really good player. But I didn't want to completely contradict myself.
That's fair.
So, but I mean, I just like a lot of the players on the Bears. I think their secondary is solid. I have questions on whether the Seahawks will be able to pass much on that secondary, because when you got so much sideline to sideline speed in that back seven, it kind of affects what you're able to do. I don't know who they have that can really shut down Doug Baldwin, though. That's my kind of question. Like, is Kyle Fuller that guy?
I don't think so. I mean, I think he's like would you say he's probably like a top 12 corner, but I don't think he's a guy that's like that shuts down receivers. He's a good player. But he's not an elite.
Yeah, and that's kind of where that's I would agree with that. And plus, they can move Doug around a lot and kind of have him be the focal point of their passing game going forward. But yeah, I mean, I would say, I just think the Bears in general as a roster might not have a ton of superstars and guys like we were talking about that kind of just scare you, but overall they have a lot of talent across the board.
Yeah.
And I just want to see it come together finally. It's kind of, and I kind of talked about this a little bit. It reminds me a little bit of the Jaguars building up their talent base over the years, and people kind of hyped them up, and then they disappointed for a couple years in a row. And then last year, it finally all kind of came together. Obviously, it's different because the Jags spent like $100 million on their guys, and it's a different situation. But when you just look at the Bears roster, it's pretty solid. It's honestly looking pretty solid.
I'm looking forward to Russell Wilson again putting up like 400 offensive yards and just running roughshod on the Bears defense. They'll get like 4 or 5 sacks, but minimal pressure otherwise.
Well, that's the thing, though, is like
it should be fun.
Russell Wilson, that game, which essentially ended Urlacher's career, was them basically employing the read option for the first time. Not the first time, but you know what I mean. It was like kind of like
that was the birth of the RPO.
The coming out party for Russell Wilson, and as a running as a read option quarterback, that's not going to happen anymore because you got Smith and Trevathan. And so, he's going to have to pick him apart with his arm this year. It's going to be completely different. So, yeah, that was sort of just like a bad timing kind of thing for the Bears, I think. And they're not going to surprise them anything this year, I think.
Let me tear them apart as I see fit, Danny. Okay. Let's close with this, and I thought this would be fine since I already got your pissed off thoughts about Yanni and Laurel. This was the quote tweet, the latest quote tweet then on Twitter. I'm pretty sure something immediately will come to mind for you. What's a struggle you had growing up, Danny, that kids today will never understand?
Well, this is like kind of boring, I guess, but like calling people's houses to get in touch with your friends.
Oh yeah, is John home?
Yeah.
Did he come outside to ride bikes?
Like what the hell? Like I feel like our generation. I don't know how old you are, but I'm of the generation.
I'm 24.
Wow. 24. Okay, so you're a little bit different, slightly different generation, or at least on different spectrums of the generation. But I'm 35. I grew up. We didn't have cell phones in high school. Like a few people had cell phones my senior year, and it was like only use it in an emergency kind of thing. I literally, my cell phone in high school was one of those ones you had to plug into a cigarette lighter if you wanted to use.
Jeez. So you had like the brick? Are we talking like the giant brick or like the flip out? Okay, you're not that.
It was like one of those Motorola ones that was a little bit flatter. I mean, it wasn't. I'm not going so far to say it was like that giant, like Saved by the Bell brick phone. But I mean, it was like I grew up in the sort of era that before cell phones were ubiquitous, and as I was in college, it became a very common thing and whatever. And I remember, this is something I always tell people because I think it's hilarious. I remember hearing about how people in Europe like to text message rather than call. Like people, in the US, it was all about calling your friends and seeing and talking. But in Europe, it was like, oh yeah, well, you just text each other. And I remember thinking, I distinctly, vividly remember having the thought, that's so stupid. Like, this is how forward thinking I am. I was like, man, that's stupid. I really hate that. And of course, now I just despise calling people. And if you call my phone, I'll pretty much never answer. Just text me. It's fine. We can communicate through nonverbal stuff. So
wait. What do you mean by people in Europe prefer texting? Texting back in like 2001?
Yeah, this was like, I would say probably like 2005 or something like that. I remember hearing about how
text did exist in 2005. I think it was a little more rudimentary, but okay, never mind.
Yeah, because like I guess in Europe back in the day, it was super expensive to call. Like it was like you had by the minute charges for if you wanted to call people on your cell phone. This was before it was different in the US. Like we had like those minute programs where you have like 1,000 minutes a month or whatever it was. But anyways, I remember because I went and traveled around for a while. It was like really, really popular it's like you just text each other because it was a lot cheaper. And I remember vividly thinking that was really stupid.
Yeah.
So yeah, that shows how much I know. And that's why I probably will never get into, investing in new technology because I was really obviously way off on that one.
Well, you should be very you should be prepared for like holograms like 10 years from now. Because that's how we're going to speak.
I'm much more open-minded to new technology now because of how much I whiffed on that one.
Yeah, I feel that. Danny, I appreciate you coming on. Really enjoyed the conversation. Really enjoyed us roasting our own teams together. This was fun.
That's what fandom is all about. That's what it's all about. I'm really excited about that week 2 one. We should talk again before that game goes up.
Yeah, definitely. I'll get in touch with you before then. We've got plenty of time. I'm looking forward to the summer break first, though. To be honest.
Yeah, no doubt.
No doubt. He is Danny Kelly, and he covers the NFL for The Ringer, the staff writer there. You can follow him on Twitter at Danny B. Kelly. I'm pretty sure most of you already do, but just in case, follow him again on Twitter at Danny B. Kelly. Follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski. Follow us on Twitter. Yeah, I'm doing this whole thing at WC Gridiron. Little housekeeping. This has been another fantastic episode. We'll be back soon. And as always, stay classy, everybody.